Hi, thanks for listening to my Convincing Proof podcast. My name's Adam Lloyd Johnson. I've been using my middle name more and more, Lloyd, Adam Lloyd Johnson, because I'm finding out that there's a lot of Adam Johnsons out there. So yeah, Adam Lloyd Johnson is what you'll see a lot on my website or the things that I publish and such. But I wanted to share in this podcast how I got into apologetics and philosophy. So, as I explained last time, I became a Christian in 1994, the year I turned 17, and I'm convinced that that is the night that I made the decision to put my faith in Christ. Before then, I was trusting in, I believed, in Christianity, grew up going to church, all that stuff, but I was trusting in what I could do to earn my way to heaven instead of what Jesus did for me. So it was that night, February 4th, 1994, that I became a Christian. And I was a fairly good student up until that point in school. Got A's and B's, but I never really was interested or excited or tried very hard, to be honest. It just, a lot of it came fairly easy for me, especially math. But for whatever reason, after I became a Christian, whether it was God working in my life or just a kind of a change in mindset, but I absolutely fell in love with school and learning, and I devoured anything I could get my hands on. Absolutely loved college. I went to the University of Nebraska. I was a business major, but any class that I took, whether it was astronomy or geography, philosophy, I absolutely loved it and just fell in love with school and learning and education. So that was a big kind of shift in my trajectory, I think. But one of the things that happened is that I got plugged into my non-denominational church in my 20s. I got married awful young. My wife and I got married when we were 18. Started having kids a few years later. And after college, I worked in the field of actuarial science. I honed in on those math skills and worked for several different insurance companies throughout my 20s, pricing mostly life insurance, a little bit of annuities. And it was a good income, a good career. I took a lot of actuary exams, studied math after college for 7 or 8 years just on my own to pass my actuarial exams. And I'm thankful for that time because it was good. It's not a coincidence that the greatest mathematicians throughout history have also been the greatest philosophers, because those two skill sets really go together. Just that analytical thinking, problem solving, so on and so forth. So I'm thankful for that time in my life because I feel like God used it to really hone a lot of my problem solving skills and analytical thinking as I was studying mathematics and statistics, probability theory. But one of the things that happened in my life during my 20s, I got very involved in my church. I was a deacon at a young age. I was a large non-denominational church. And towards the end of my 20s, the church approached me about joining the staff. And I was super excited about that. I had always aspired to ministry and always played around with the idea of going to seminary, just not knowing, exactly how God would use somebody like me. Um, not very social, not an extrovert like most pastors, more introverted, more studious, type of person. And most of the pastors I saw were just, flamboyant, extroverts, always in and around people, in and with folks. So I was wondering how God would use somebody like me in the ministry. But when my church approached me, I was excited about it and really explored that opportunity. But I ended up saying no, and one of the reasons I said no to it when I was in my late 20s to the church being on staff was because I had a skeleton in my closet. And besides just being a studious introvert, the other concern that I had was the skeleton in the closet. And I didn't think that God could use somebody like me in the ministry because of this skeleton that nobody really knew about. This thing that I was struggling with in secret. And what I was struggling with was doubt. whether Christianity was really true or not. These doubts and thoughts, I started having them soon after I became a Christian, so 17, 18, and then definitely, throughout college. And a lot of things would trigger it, whether I would be exposed to evolution or historical reliability of the New Testament, the problem of evil, just all sorts of things would trigger me to have doubts. And I was very frustrated by them. It felt like most of the Christians around me could believe so easily, and why was I to be such a person who was so critical and skeptical? But it's part and parcel of who I am as an analytical thinker, as I understand now. But at the time, I was very frustrated at myself for having these doubts, and for then, having to say no to this staff position at the church, because I had aspired to ministry. And so I was angry at myself. I was very displeased with who I was, the type of person that I was, and that exacerbated the doubts, as you can imagine. A lot of doubts are generated by emotions and negative emotions. And so all of that frustration kind of built upon each one thing onto another, and it developed really into a full-fledged, I would say, crisis of faith in my late 20s. I never walked away from Christianity. I never, claimed to be anything but a Christian. But in my mind, in my own private thinking and thought life, I was seriously close to just rejecting Christianity completely. It kind of turned my life upside down. It caused a lot of difficulty in my personal relationships. I had a hard time working in my actuarial career, and it finally came out. I finally had to talk to some people about this because it was just a very intense trial. And I'm so thankful one of the pastors at my church gave me a book by Francis Schaeffer. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with Schaeffer, but you can check him out online. Francis Schaeffer was a Presbyterian pastor and minister mostly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But he wrote 20 plus books, passed away in the early 80s, so I've never met him. But it was through his books then, after I devoured that first one, I devoured all the rest of his books, and it was really his thinking as a, quasi-philosopher, definitely apologist, pastor, theologian. And it was his thinking that, and his books, that really turned my thinking around. And I would say Schaeffer rescued me intellectually, psychologically, spiritually. He rescued me on all sorts of levels. And after, I went through that experience and was helped so much by Schaeffer through his books, it became very obvious that God was calling me to serve other people the way that Schaeffer served me in this field of apologetics and philosophy. So I started pursuing that and started being more open about my struggles and doubts. Come to find out, as you can imagine, there were a lot of other people who had similar questions. And so I began just helping people informally, friends, people at church. But as I pursued this more as a full-time ministry, it just led to a lot of steps in our family of moving away from my actuarial science career, moving to the Charlotte, North Carolina area to go to seminary. I wanted to study with Norman Geisler at Southern Evangelical Seminary. So I started that in 2007, moved there in 2008, and then in 2009 became a Southern Baptist pastor. And I served at a Southern Baptist church as a pastor for 8 years, mostly throughout my 30s while I was working on my seminary degree. I ended up transferring my master's degree, my seminary degree, up to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, a Southern Baptist school. And that's where I also got my PhD in philosophy of religion, which I finished just a couple years ago in 2020. So I was at seminary for 13 years, and it was that experience which kind of launched me into ministry, this burden to help others the way that Schaeffer helped me. And I really enjoyed my time serving as a local church pastor. I got ordained, and I'm thankful for that. I still do weddings from time to time and funerals for folks, but I don't serve as a local church pastor anymore. In 2017, I stepped down from my church to serve full-time with Ratio Christi, which is a campus ministry. I've been with them for 5 years now. We do apologetics and evangelism on college campuses across the country, and I mostly serve at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And I've started my own ministry on the side called Convincing Proof, of course, which I use to get a lot of my own work out. But things have developed where, I'm able to write books now and collaborate with other apologists, philosophers, publish articles, develop a website, meet with people, of course, one-on-one, talk to people over social media and help them in this area of apologetics. And my faith has been strengthened through this studying of philosophy and apologetics. My faith is stronger than it's ever been. I'm utterly convinced that Christianity is true, and the decision that I made in 1994 was the right decision to trust in Christ. So that's kind of my story of how God called me into this field. I love this field. I love discussing these issues and helping people in these areas. What I specialize in is probably moral philosophy the most, and the moral argument for God's existence. But I dabble in all areas of apologetics and philosophy, from historical issues to scientific issues to deeper philosophical issues. But anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. I'd love to hear how God called you into ministry, or if there's questions you have that I can help with, please let me know. I'm here to serve. That's how I view ministry, is serving other people with the gifts and abilities that God has given me.